this whole telling stories through YouTube and cameras and my phone and all of that, it feels like surfing. It just feels like, whoa, okay, here. It works with the intuition.
Yeah.
Hey, you may be our audience. Live.
That would be something for me.
We had the good group last week. We were wondering, as we got closer to, like the big events, how many people would come. Wednesday has proven to be a challenge for us. We can't. It was the only time that I could do it. So that's how we made that decision.
What are you doing locally now?
Just this. Yeah.
Cool.
It's most of my work right now is with teaching. So and teaching adults actually. I have 3 classes that I do with the kids. The tail spinners for the youngest, free teller for 10 through 13. That one has really taken off. That's almost like a role-playing game, storytelling, really fun. And then the teen group has also really, they've formed themselves in a really wonderful way. So most of my time is working with teachers and starting to get back into local government, just teaching them storytelling as a communication tool. There's a real appetite for that, which is nice.
Would you be open to working with a school group? School. Homeschool.
Well, one of the groups that I work with is around the country, actually around the world, a cohort of homeschool parent teachers. And so I work with them every Tuesday afternoon and Wednesday evening. Oh yeah, it's later tonight. Right. No, not this week. Last week I missed it because I had such a good time doing this. I forgot all about it. But what do you mean? Is it in here, around the Boston area?
In Milton.
Co-op? Okay.
Yep. There's I don't know what best to describe or how best to describe it. Maybe micro school is the best.
Oh, fun. Okay.
I don't know. It's a group of homeschoolers, but the kids get together 3 days a week, and they do some tutoring in the morning and then project-based learning in the afternoon.
Lovely.
That's
Yeah.
really neat.
Yeah, that's a great model.
Yeah.
I love that.
And then they're home with their families or off doing field trips or whatever on Thursdays and Fridays.
Nice. Well, I haven't done much live for a while, and so this has been a real treat to just do this and interact with people without there being. I enjoy all the online stuff, but it's people. That's the reason. So I would love to talk to you and see what you're envisioning and if it could work.
Okay.
That sounds great.
I have no vision yet. Just
Yeah.
think it would be amazing.
Great. Do you know how to reach me?
Maybe.
The easiest one to remember is david@davidsewellmccann.com.
Okay. Great.
Does that sound? Okay.
Yeah.
Hey, should we just start?
We certainly can.
Yeah. Let me let the team out there.
Okay.
I actually like that it's just us.
Yeah.
This is great.
Can I show you really quick the shots that we have? I mean, I'm just looking at these
Well,
seats. I can get much.
no, I actually kind of like the emptiness of it because tonight's all about
I
community.
know. I'm a little surprised.
And I'm just going to make it about the people here.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Sounds good. You can turn on your live audio whenever you guys. Yeah.
Hey, we're going to start.
Actually,
Do we got a full house? Yeah, it seems like we're starting. That's all I need. Yeah. What time is it?
It is 5:01.
Oh, 5:01? Oh, okay. I'll just kind of chit-chat for the next 4 minutes or so if more people are coming in.
I did start the stream. Do you want us to go to the stream now? Or
Yeah.
Okay. That's ready to go. So I'm going to put up the watch on.
Awesome. Well, I thought it was a little bit later, so there might be more people. But I loved the idea of just the 3 of us and Will, but we'll see, because the theme is, and hello, those of you who are here.
Hello, those of you who are here with us. I'd love to discuss some things with you and with my two live guests. The good news is that tonight is all about community. Hi. This is, even though I'm amplified and echoey, I'm trying to get a casual vibe going right now, and for it to be chatty. We're not really starting yet, but I want to engage our people online, because that's going to be, in terms of numbers, the most people are you. And what's happening here is going to be one of the variables of our storytelling. So no pressure to people who are here. It's only if moved. But you all will be doing similar to what you've done the past 2 weeks, which is toss out comments, ideas for the story when we get to the collaborative one, which is the second story. And there are 4 storytellers that are there. One is named Sky, one is named Joya, one is named Becky or Rebecca, and the last is Lydia. Those 4 and me, we are a group of storytellers, and we call ourselves Lightwood. And I forget why. Sky knows. He might say it in the comments. But we're working like one person. So I'm the one that's in the room. I'm the one that, walks around and lights candles and says hello, and I do a lot of talking. But I'm following cues that you all put in the comments that the Lightwood storytellers read, and they're trained in a way of recognizing a body response to things, which we've all experienced, which we're reading a book or something and we suddenly get filled with energy and the temperature changes, or this is the moment. Do you know that the story that I have, I don't even know if you know the story, either of you, the story that we're not really officially started yet, I'm still chatty. Can I give you a hug? Yeah. It's really good to see you. It's good to see you. Yeah, yeah. It's about a seal. Yeah, yeah, and that we just came up with that today. So the first one is a sleepy time story, Aiden the harbor seal. Familiar? Great, awesome, okay. And the second one we'll make together. We're going to do live. And I wonder if you want to do any storytelling tonight, or you just want to sit back and listen. Yeah, that usually means like, sure. Sure, we're just telling stories. So if you're comfortable with that, Wyatt might be here tonight. True name Caleb. He's been at the last 2. So he may jump in and do some storytelling as well. Okay, so I think we can start for realsies. I'm David of Sparkle Stories and How to Story. We are in First Congregational Church of Winchester, and the minister is here, and his name's Will.
My name's Will.
Would you talk about this space and what's in it, and then I'll tell you what an added bonus about Will today.
So this is our newly renovated chapel space, and we use it for all sorts of arts events, as well as services and rituals and rites, and what you see on the walls around you are paintings, because we had a open studio in Winchester recently, and these are 2 of the artists who are up on the 3rd floor. Tracy Vartanigian Burhans is the artist on the right side, and Jenny Owens is the artist on the left side, and they both have studios upstairs along with a photographer, and we as a church are kind of reclaiming that work to be patrons of the arts, patrons of beauty in the world. And so we invited a beautiful storyteller as well. So we're grateful to have you with us, David.
And we have history. We've known each other a long time in Vermont.
Right.
Right when Sparkle was starting, we attended Will's church. So now we've filled out a little bit. Tonight is all about community, and for the last 2 Wednesdays, we've had a good amount of people in here, and maybe people will trickle in, etc. But I'm thrilled that it's we happy few. This is really nice. This is nice and cozy. And if you'd like to come closer, you can, but it doesn't matter. If you're comfortable where you are, that's great. So the first Wednesday when we gathered here, it was stories of light, and we connected that light with gratitude. We had a section in between the story that I told was the Cooper and the Winter Oak. And then we were able to really key in on things that we can feel grateful for. And that gratitude created light. And then that led to a group story that we all told together. It was a really fun story. Really enjoyed that. And then last week, when we came, the theme that we gathered around was stillness. And it was a cold night. And I was really experiencing the cold in a deep way. And we went outside. And the idea was if we are still, even in that cold, the result, sort of like gratitude creates light, stillness created warmth. And it was another kind of magical moment. And out of that warmth, then another story came. Really fun story, totally surprising. And those stories, those of you who have been here, they're responsive to things that you say, and we'll read in the comments. Or I have my phone here, and those are connected to the Lightwood four storytellers that are around the world. And those are prompts. But then also I might, see if anybody else wants to participate and create a little bit, maybe even tell part of the story. We'll see. Tonight, we're going to have another variable, 2 variables. Probably just the one, though, now that, with our happy few, maybe that'll be a little bit much. But Will is a musician as well. And so he'll be playing the guitar and singing, and quite miraculously, the song that he had prepared, because I didn't know what he was going to prepare, overlays perfectly with the story. Actually, I responded this story to the song that he brought, and I just heard a little while ago. So that story is in the cold. And I want to say one more thing before I go into that story. I have been in the water all day, and for the last 3 days, pumping it out of my basement. And it's really cold water. And the basement is not prepared for this. It needs a full system, and it doesn't have it. So I have been talking to the water that's coming in so freely and happily into the cellar and saying, I feel your joy in being inside my house, but I don't want you in here. And so we need to come to an arrangement, and let me know what that is, so that you're not coming here, but we can interact in a different way, maybe in my imagination. And the water fairies, I'm not sure what's happening, said stories about the sea. And so I've been working on this story about a mermaid. I've been working on this story, and it's working. They're talking to me. The seller is talking to me on this story. And tonight's story that I'll tell now is in the water. It's in the sea. It's in the seawater to the north. And another miraculous thing is it's about a seal, and that's my relationship to you, is a seal. So let me see if the storytellers will be speaking through the phone, and they'll also be doing comments through this way. I think we're ready to go. Great. All set. Fire and water. The theme of tonight is community. It's directly related to water. Water connects us all. And in the far north, in a series of small rocky islands, there is an extended family of harbor seals. On one particular small island, there's a whole family of extended uncles and aunts and cousins and second cousins of these harbor seals, and one of them is a young seal named Aiden. Aiden likes to play with the other, all the cousins and second cousins. He calls them all his friends. They play in the water. They swap stories. And all of them are a little bit interested in the stories about people. Now, this is a remote part in the north, and it's on a very small island, lots of islands, hard to get around for people. So none of these seals, with very few exceptions, actually have seen people. But some have. And some go to other islands where there are other seals, and they tell stories about the people, and those stories spread. And so all of the young seals were interested in people, but Aiden was particularly interested. Aiden was fascinated. He wanted to know everything about people. He wanted to know, do they eat? What do they eat? When do they eat? Do they sleep like we do? How do they sleep? What's the arrangement? Questions after questions, but of all the things that he knew about people, the most interesting thing was that they had boats. He hadn't seen a boat, but he had heard that they're made of wood, and they carve them in a certain way that they float on top. Now, he had heard that some people can swim and that they swim like ducks. They're on top and they splash around, and somehow they're able to stay on top. And he finds that really interesting. And they also make sounds. Some of the sounds sound like seal sounds, some sound like duck sounds, some sound like seagull sounds, but it's these boats. They get in the boats and they go and float around. And they do things on the boats. And he really wanted to see actual people in boats. Mostly he wanted to see the boats. Now the older seals, they discouraged all the talk about the people. They understood young seals are young pups. They're interested in all sorts of things. They're very curious, understood. But let's not go too far with it. You don't need to keep going on and on about people, because the fact of the matter is, we probably won't see them, but if we do, you need to hide, because some people are not safe. That's just how it is. So keep your distance from people. And they would shut down a lot of the stories. So Aiden would focus on his friends, his cousins, and ask them questions, and they would always shrug. They didn't know the answers. So it was a little frustrating. And one day something happened. His mother was a very good hunter, was able to bring lots of food to the family. It was early morning, and she said, Aiden, I'll be back. I'm going to go off to Puffin Point. Your uncle says that there's a particularly large group of fish just north of the old boat, and then I'll be back with some fish. Aiden said, what? Old boat? What old boat? What are you talking about, Mother? And he could tell that this was a slip. His mother wasn't supposed to say this. She took a moment and took some breaths and said, yes, this is actually something that I was going to tell you, but I was going to wait until you were a little bit older. But yes, there is a boat. And she described the boat, made of wood, old boat, big. and that it's near Puffin Point. And Aidan knew all about Puffin Point. He'd never been there. It's too far away. But to hear that there was an actual boat that he could go to and see with his own eyes, well, he was overcome with excitement. It was still early in the morning. And so he began to ask her, please, can you take me there? I really want to see a boat. I'm ready. I can make this trip. And his mother, her name was Miranda, she thought about this and thought about the others, and some of the other pups had swum that far, and Aidan was actually showing that he was capable of these longer trips. And so she said, all right, you need to stay right with me. We need to watch the tides. Through the course of the day, the tides will change and our route will have to change. It's not going to be easy. It will be a difficult travel, a difficult swim. But stay with me, and we can't stay there very long. We'll hunt for a little while. I'll show you the boat, and then we need to come back. We can't stay there very long. And Aidan was overcome with excitement. And so the two of them, this was all on top of the flat rock where they slept. This is early in the morning. The two of them made their way over to the edge of the flat rock, which gave an immediate entry into the water. And the two of them went into the water together. This was Aidan's favorite moment, to feel that cold, cold water. But you see, seals have this almost like a coat around them. Keeps them warm, but it's still sensitive. They can feel the cold, but appreciate it without feeling like it was uncomfortable or that it would somehow be harmful to them. It was exhilarating. And Aidan went into the water and felt his entire body touch that cold water, and he smiled. And then the two of them went. He looked around while he was underwater, big smile on his face, and they came to the edge where they hit the current, and they went along that, and he knew most of the way until they went the furthest that he had ever gone, between two smaller islands, and he went through there. And it was indeed a long swim. It was longer than he thought, but he was so filled with excitement that it wasn't that bad. He was quite hungry by the time that he could see Puffin Point up ahead, and it was an unusual island. He had heard it described, and it was exactly what the description was. It had an actual peak to it, and he knew that on the other side was lots of puffins, these birds. So he was very excited to see it, and every time he would come up for air with his mother, he would see that, and they would go back down, and he felt like he and his mother were one being as they swam together through the waters and around certain structures. And they made it to the point. He looked around there, didn't see anything unusual. He saw bayberry bushes, some cranberry, a little bit of a rugosa, which was on his island, and he could smell them all. They all had such a specific scent. It smelled like home, but he knew that he was in a very different place. And they came to the edge and turned the corner around where the puffins usually were. And there it was. It's big. And it was wood. He knew wood. And he could see one piece of wood stretching up, arching up out of the water, and then a few other pieces coming off of that, almost like bones. It almost looked like bones of an enormous fish. And his mother, they came to the surface, and his mother said, "This is the front of the boat. And let me show you the back." And they went back under and swam to the back, and she said, "This is the back." And he had all these questions, and she said, "All right, we don't have much time, but I'll show you under the water, and then we need to do some hunting, and then we need to return." Down they went. It was unlike anything that he had ever seen. And he could imagine, even though he'd never seen a person, he could imagine what a person would do in a space like this, because there were all these flat surfaces under the water, and then there were all these little catacombs and spaces that you could actually swim into, and these pivoting pieces of wood that could open and close, and there were containers down there, sort of round containers, and there were boxy things, and all these stories that he had heard about people and boats, they were all coming back to him now in context, and he could see them all together. It was so exciting. And his mother did the best when they came to the surface. She did her best to explain that, they would put food in the containers and tools and things, and those things were used for fixing the boat, and her understanding of this part of the boat is these sorts of things happened, and question after question, but it was time to go back. So they hunted together. And the two of them had hunted together before, and he had hunted with his friends, and he had hunted with other members of the family, and he knew that kind of working together in catching fish he knew how to do that. So, and when that was over with, he really wanted to go back to the boat, but his mother said, "It's time to go back." You could see that the sky was actually starting to turn orange. They'd been there all day. The way back was much harder. The swim back was a lot harder than he thought. It seemed to take much longer than he anticipated. Every time they would come up, it felt like he hadn't gone very far and back down. And so by the time they got back to their little island, he was exhausted. He was very tired. The other cousins came swimming out and had all sorts of questions. They knew where he went. They wanted to know what had happened, but he said, I'll tell you in the morning. And he came up onto the island, onto his flat rock, and he could see it covered with his family. This was his family. This is who he hunted with, who he ate with, who he slept with. They were all together on this, and they were so many of them were looking at him and this incredible experience that he had. And he knew that tomorrow he would be telling stories about what he had seen. Really looked forward to that. Now, he was very, very tired. He wanted to go to sleep. And so he climbed up on the flat rock with his mother. And the two of them snuggled in with a number of his cousins and aunts and uncles. He could smell them. He could hear them as they were breathing, and he knew some of them had already fallen asleep. And as he was thinking and imagining all the incredible things that he had seen underwater that day, with each breath in of that bayberry bush, the cranberry, the rugosa, got more and more tired until little Aiden and his mother and his cousins and aunts and uncles, the entire harbor seal community fell softly and deeply asleep.
Lie down to sleep, sleep well, my darling. Blue is the eye, watches over the sea. Lie down to sleep, sleep well, my darling. Blue is the eye that looks after thee. A crack in the sky lends a light to the dark. The wind blows the ember, a fire from the hearth. You carry it proudly through ditches and trees and cross the horizon to lie down to sleep. So sleep, lie down and sleep. Sleep well, my darling, blue is the eye, watches over the sea. Lie down to sleep. Sleep well, my darling, blue is the eye that looks after thee. And over the ocean toward a new world, the city, the island, the tear and the pearl, a boat on the water casts out a clear eye. The darkness beneath us is teeming with light.
So as we listen to Will play, let the images that were just bubbling up in your imagination, listening to the words, the tones. And this is something that communities have, a reason to gather, and it's not uncommon for them to sing songs together, play music together, dance. And I think of the water and all that connects those seals, those islands. That water also connects people across oceans, downstream of rivers. So let your imagination continue to spread and honor what images come up. You as well. Let's just listen to Will for a moment, and as the images come to you, those of you who are out there, you can put those in the comments. The Lightwood storytellers will let me know through this magic device. And those of you who are here, if something comes to you and you want to share it, you can raise your hand or just say it out loud, and we'll incorporate that in our group storytelling today. We have little fancy mice. And we also have arms came waving out of the sea, soothing tides under the moon. What about here? What images are coming up?
Kind of like an eye, like the ocean forms like an eye. It's watching over the seals as they fly.
And is it forming an eye from the light? The shimmering from the sun or from stars? Yeah, great, excellent. Yeah, feeling relaxed. Definitely. Anyone else? Anything coming to the surface? Yes. Okay. So I know this story teacher as Seal Searcher quite remarkably. Can you start our story by describing that crackling fireplace, and I'll take it from there. Sounds, colors, anything. It doesn't matter. I'm just liking the quiet. It's nice. Yeah.
According hot,
Yes.
and the warmth felt like the sun on the face.
Yes. So the fireplace had a sound to it. It sounded like popcorn. And the warmth that was coming from the fireplace was like the sun on your face. That is precisely how those mice would describe that night, the night when everything happened. So those fancy little mice, they came out of their old home. They considered it their home. There were people there as well, but they considered this house to be theirs. And there were 4 of them. They were best friends. Their hole was actually positioned perfectly as a part of the hearth. All the attention went to the front, human attention, people attention went to the front of the hearth. It was actually a big block of stones that came out and then had a little bit that on either side into the wooden wall. On this side, underneath or actually right behind one of the larger stones that was sticking out, there was a hole, and the people never found that. That's where the mice came in and out. And these 4 mice were children of a larger community of mice that actually were in the cellar, and they all had an agreement that they would not go up into the main quarters of the house because of things that have happened in the past. And there were stories about things that had happened in the past, certain dangers with the people, certain contraptions, and of course the cat. They heard the cat. These 4 fancy little mice, however, they saw themselves as fancy little mice because that meant that they were a little different than the other mice. These fancy little mice had a different agenda, and they had the capacity for more than ordinary mice. They were very young. They hadn't seen much, but they knew that their place was upstairs. So this house was by the sea, was right by the sea. And in the basement, all they knew of the sea was the sound. And they could hear, it was like a breath. And they could feel the salty, cold air coming from the water. The cellar was such that, there were places where the air could come in, but they couldn't see the waters. They knew about the waters, but the fancy little mice had seen the waters because they had come into the building, into the main quarters, at night when everybody was asleep, and this was a cat that liked to snuggle, so would snuggle in with the humans that lived there, and they could explore. And there was one night where they were able to actually look out and see what they called the eye. And this eye was the sea. It was the sea, and there was a lighthouse not far from there, and the light from the lighthouse would shine on the waters, and it looked like an eye. And they thought the eye was a kind of deity. They thought that they could talk to the eye and ask it questions and make certain demands and talk about themselves. They were fancy little mice, so they wanted to really give a good presentation of who they were, and they would come and gather up on the sill, and they would bow before the eye, and they would tell them about themselves and what they would like and what sorts of things, plans they had for themselves, adventures they would like to go on. And the eye would respond by blinking. Blinking. Now, they didn't put it together that the lighthouse light would go away and come back and go away and come back, but it looked like the light would blink at them. And so it was on this night that they were making their petitions, they were telling their stories to the eye, and the eye would blink back at them and agree with their plans and think that they were indeed fancy little mice And the blinking was all they needed. It was like someone saying yes to you over and over again. When something else caught their attention, and I wonder if Lightwood and those of you out there know what it was that caught their attention. So if you know what caught their attention, could you let the Lightwood storytellers know this? And we're all going to enjoy this vision of the 4 mice. Does anyone in the room, what caught their attention comes, does anyone in the room know a description of any of these 4 mice? Can you see any of them and what they look like? Yes.
One of them kind of looks like butler.
Yeah, yeah. And how, like in mannerism?
Mannerism and also like, you know that guy from Cinderella with like what's it called? Like the monocle?
Oh, the mouse has a monocle?
Yeah.
Right. Kind of carved out of an old leaf. Just kind of put it right in front, and held that in place. Yeah, that was probably one of the fancier ones. Do you remember any of the other mice?
Another mouse kind of looks like a soldier.
Yep, there was the soldier one, the taller one. Was very protective over the others. So we had the fancy butler, we had the soldier one. Anyone else picturing another mouse there either? Because I know what happened. I now know what happened. And it was pretty startling. Well, the other 2 mice, we should probably say, we should describe them. We had the soldier, we had the butler, we had the cook. We had the cook that was always looking for new ingredients to bring down below. Hadn't ever actually made it to the kitchen in the house, didn't even know there was a kitchen. But that was their fancy part of it. And then the last one was the one with all the ideas, didn't really have like a title, but was the schemer that came up with the ideas of how they would get out of things and made plans and would always say, like, I love it when a plan comes together. And that was him. He called himself Papard. He was the only one with a name. And so, yes, indeed. Well, what happened actually wasn't something that they saw, it was a sound. It was a very loud sound, and it frightened them, and they all jumped. What they didn't know what it was the sound of the lighthouse sending out an alert, and it was the horn. And the alert horn went off, and the mice jumped. It scared them. And, well, actually, not all of them jumped. 3 of them jumped away, but the cook remained. The cook was fascinated because, yes, that was a scary sound, but the cook could see people. Now, the fancy little mice had seen people before, but they were always sleeping. They were always in their beds. The cat was in there. They didn't spend much time. People, as far as they were concerned, made clompy sounds all day long and made sounds like mar, 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 mar upstairs. But when they saw them, they were mostly still, had their mouths open, and just laid there, and some of them would make grumbly sounds. These mice, or these people, were walking around, and they wore these kind of yellow, shiny, wet costumes. And they were very busy. They were going this way and that, pulling out boats and getting them ready. And the cook called down and said, something's happening. Come up. And cautiously, the other 3 went up there. And the soldier looked and said, they're going to war. I wasn't exactly sure what war was, but it was something that soldiers did. And it was a time where it was great excitement, and there was tussling, and at some point someone would say, I am the winner, and the other one would say, oh, and that was what war was. And so suggested that what was happening here was war. Now, the butler said, no, no, no. There's a guest coming, and they're preparing for the guest. There's a great person coming, probably the queen. And the last of them, the Papard, who had all the ideas, said, no, they're up to something, and we need to find out. We're the only four that can help. Follow me. So they followed Papard. Thank you. And they climbed down, and they went back into the cellar, and they knew that there was another place out. And so they crawled out that place while the other mice were busy in the far end. That's where they spent most of their time. And they crawled out outside. It was raining. It was cold. Papard called them and said, this way. And they came over to the edge of the house and could now see, right about where the window was, what was happening below. And they could see in the distance that there were lights spinning around and shining on another vessel. And the vessel was very low in the water. And they watched. And they waited for Papard to tell them what their next move was, what they needed to do. When they saw the eye. It wasn't the eye like they remembered the eye. That eye had a big, bright center, and then around the outside of it was the shape, and it would come and go, and it would wink at them to let them know, yes, yes, everything that you're saying, yes. This eye was in the water. This eye was from underneath shining up, rather than from without shining down. All these sparkly little lights were coming toward the boat. They were not people. They were not ships. They were fish? No, not fish. What could they be? And they were dazzled as they watched, as these sparkling, luminescent beings in the water made their way slowly and more closely to the boat. And it was the cook that said, fairies? And they all took a step back. They had heard stories of fairies before. People told stories of fairies, but other creatures told stories of fairies as well. And what a fairy was a being of the natural world. It was anything that had to do with the natural world, mice, trees, berries, even people. There were always fairies, these little beings that would help them, that would take care of them. And they had heard that in the sea, in the water, there were millions and millions and millions of them that would just show up and do things, and sometimes they would help people. So as the ship, the smaller boats were coming out, and the people were gathering around, they watched as these luminescent little beings came round the boat and held it, as if the sea itself was holding onto that boat. And the other boats arrived. There were people on the boat. They took the people back. Another boat came, hooked something onto that boat, and began to pull it. And the moment that the boat began to be pulled to shore, all that light spread out. And the four fancy little mice felt a lot of things in that moment. They were a little confused. They were a little excited. They were tired. But mostly they were thinking about the other mice. And Papard said, let's go back inside. And the others said, yeah, let's go back inside. And they quietly made their way back into the cellar, where some of the other mice were wondering where they had been and said, did you go upstairs? Where have you been? And they said, we went upstairs, and we went outside, and we saw everybody help these few people. And they told the full story. And all the mice gathered round. And the community of mice, they would make fun of the fancy little mice behind their back and talk about like, oh, they think they're so grand and so unique. Well, when they get older, they'll learn, it'll be different, all of that. But something changed that night. They could see that the fancy little mice, sure, they still enjoyed being fancy, but now it wasn't about them. Instead, it was about everything. Everything felt like it had magic in it. Nature spirits everywhere. Fairies. And from that point on, all their fanciness was not for themselves, but for everyone and everything around them. This has been fun. Thank you all. Thank you all, and thank you, this happy bunch here of storytellers. Maybe we'll do this again sometime. But I think in closing, I am really taken with this idea of true community, which is not only, seeing opportunities to help each other out, to gather around those that are in need, but to actually pay attention. Like what crept up on those fancy little mice, we can get so wrapped up in our own thing that sometimes we can miss something important that's going on, something magical that others might miss. And so, me personally, I'm going to go back to that cellar. I'm going to pump out some more water. But instead of going in there and complaining, I'm going to tell them the story that we shared tonight and offer it as a gift. Do whatever you want, water fairies that seem to love the cellar. But tonight, it's a truce. We're all in this together. So have a great night, everybody. Yeah. Good time. Night.